Here's another article from my PC Mag days for my little PC Mag notebook thing. And this, I wrote, I think exactly precisely 200 articles during my time as an intern and full-time at Ziff Davis. And in August of 2009, I had gone online to, I guess, look up some of my articles. I was probably bored or something, and I realized that 100 of my articles, like exactly half, had gone missing. And, or at some point I realized this. And then in August of 2009, I found that all of 200 of the articles were back online. So as a precaution, I just printed them all out. So that way I would have them in case they ever decided that they wanted to disappear on their own again and just not be available online anywhere. So, anyway, this article published on 4/6/2006, written by me, Barryless Johnson. IRS rule changes could expose your tax info. The IRS has stirred controversy with a proposal to loosen rules regarding electronic disclosure of private taxpayer information to outside parties. Current provisions in Tax Code Section 7216 set criminal penalties for tax preparers that make unauthorized use or disclosure of tax return information. In hearings in Washington this week, the IRS asked for public comment on whether to rewrite the current tax law. The proposed rule changes would allow tax preparers to share taxpayers' personal information with any outside party for marketing and other purposes, providing they warn the consumer. Furthermore, the IRS claims that the rule changes are not significant enough to warrant a regulatory hearing to determine their legality. If upheld, the new tax code revisions would take effect 30 days after approval, which would likely place them in the books for the current 2006 tax year in time for filing in April 2007. The new rules address situations in a digital era where problems like identity theft have become more common. What the what the IRS is attempting to achieve through such regulation is to extend and strengthen consent and warning requirements for disclosure of information in order to clarify that it applies to both paper tax returns and electronic tax returns, according to an IRS spokesperson. We are making this change because current regulations are 32 years old. We never envisioned the type of technology we have now, said an IRS spokeswoman. The current regulation is silent on the issue of consent regarding electronic transmission. The proposed regulations will update existing use and disclosure rules. Use is described as what the tax preparer can do with tax information internally. Disclosure is what tax preparers can do with that information externally or with companies outside of those that are affiliated with the IRS. Among the changes are two key revisions: new and additional rules regarding taxpayers' electronic consent for sharing tax return information with third parties, as well as guidelines for tax preparers for disclosing consumer information. The proposed changes also alter the definition of tax return information, quote unquote, to include additional information than what taxpayers literally furnish to a tax return preparer, according to the IRS proposal. The IRS is seeking to adopt the principle that taxpayers should be able to, quote, control and direct the use of their own tax information as they see fit, end quote. However, companies like Intuit, as well as other government representatives like the National Association of Attorneys General, have voiced concern over the risk in the changes being proposed, particularly in terms of identity theft. Quote, in the past, it was possible for this information to be exchanged by tax preparers for certain reasons, a spokesperson for the National Association of Attorneys General told PC Magazine. This proposal broadens that access and increases the risk that information can be used fraudulently or maliciously, end quote. One revision would allow a tax preparer to provide information normally considered part of a confidential tax return to other agencies within its corporate structure in order to sell additional services to the consumer. Quote, the current regulations restrict use of tax return information for the solicitation of services or facilities in matters not related to the IRS to those currently offered by the tax return preparer or members of the tax return preparer's quote-unquote affiliated group within the meaning of Section 1504, end quote, the proposal states. Quote, because taxpayers must consent to any use or disclosure connected with the solicitation, taxpayer privacy interests are adequately protected regardless of whether a service is currently offered or whether a business offering a service to the taxpayer is a member of a tax return preparer's affiliated group, the IRS argued. The currently offered and affiliated group rules restrict the ability of taxpayers to control and direct the use of their own tax return information as they see fit, end quote. A second provision would loosen the restrictions governing to whom a tax provider could release information, placing it at the preparer's discretion. Quote, proposed, 301.7216-2, in parentheses H, amends current 301.7216-2, and then parentheses E, which authorizes attorneys and accountants to disclose tax return information to third parties in the normal course of rendering legal or accounting services if the taxpayer expressly or impliedly consents to the disclosure, the IRS said. The proposed regulations remove the requirement that the taxpayer's express or implied consent is necessary before these types of disclosures can be made because implied consent would exist in virtually every situation when an attorney or accountant is required to disclose tax return information to a third party in the normal course of providing legal or accounting services to a taxpayer. The proposed regulations provide that these disclosures are authorized unless the taxpayer directs otherwise, end quote. NAAG's membership of attorney generals disagreed. Quote, tax returns contain a smorgasbord of sensitive data, including your social security number, address, medical expenses, bank accounts, income, and more, the NAAG spokeswoman said. We're always concerned about opportunities for that information to land in the wrong hands, end quote. NAAG went so far as to send a letter to IRS Commissioner Mark Everson explaining the organization's concerns over the proposed rule changes. 47 attorney generals signed the letter. Quote, we are greatly concerned that this regulation will erode consumer privacy and security of sensitive personal information, with a consequent increase in problems such as identity theft and intrusive marketing practices, it said. As representatives of law enforcement, we believe more, not less, privacy protection is needed, end quote. Intuit maintains that the procedures, as written in the existing law, are inadequate and ill-matched to the challenges that crop up in the world of e-commerce. The company says it encourages the IRS to update the rules to, quote, ensure adequate protection in modern bricks and mortar commerce is equally vital for assurance of protection of the public interest. End quote. However, Intuit suggested that any new regulations meet a number of critical objectives. First, that the rule must be faithful to the law and assure the rigorous protection of tax return information from misuse and improper disclosure. Second, that the rule must assure protection of the confidentiality of the relationship between tax preparer and taxpayer. And finally, that the rule must clearly prohibit the sale or rental of tax return information by a tax preparer to third parties. Quote, the sweeping regulatory overreach of the expanded definition of tax return information does not add protection that benefits the taxpayer, but instead creates a wide range of unintended consequences and dysfunction, said Barbara Lawler, Chief Privacy Officer at Intuit during a hearing on Tuesday. The tax return information definition of the proposed rule must be restored to the practical and well-understood definition that has worked well for 30 years, end quote. Similarly, the National Association of Attorneys General said it respects and supports the IRS's intended goal of continued or enhanced protection of taxpayers' privacy. However, allowing such information to be disclosed for secondary purposes dangerously undermines that goal, NAAG added. Quote, we believe that the best, most prudent course for the Internal Revenue Service to take is simply to prohibit tax preparers from sharing tax return information for purposes unrelated to the preparation of tax returns, NAAG said in the letter. However, if the IRS does permit tax return information to be bought or exchanged, the association recommended a number of safeguards, including a provision that the IRS should restrict the disclosure of information for marketing purposes, ensure taxpayers knowingly and voluntarily consent to each specific use of their information, and prohibit tax preparers from disclosing information not needed to obtain the specific services requested by the customers. Quote, tax preparation firms should focus on tax preparation, said the NAAG in its letter. The Internal Revenue Service should not permit them to reap additional commercial benefits from the special relationship of trust they have with their clients, end quote. Copyright 2009 of Davis Media, Inc., all rights reserved.